If anyone had told me 3 years ago that the happiest day of my life would also become the one that ruined me, I would have laughed it off. Back then, I was just an ordinary man named Callum Wren, 34, steady job in logistics, flat in Brighton, nothing glamorous but comfortable. I'd spent most of my life working, saving, waiting for the kind of love that made sense. Then I met her, Ilara Shaw. She was unlike anyone I'd ever known. The kind of woman who made every ordinary day feel like it was lifted out of a film. She was funny without trying, bold without being cruel, and she looked at me like she could see the version of myself I'd been too tired to become. I met her through a friend's engagement party. She was the bride's cousin, standing near the punch bowl wearing a navy dress and an expression that said she didn't really want to be there. We talked, we laughed, and she told me she didn't believe in love at first sight, which made me laugh because I was already halfway in love by the time she said it. Over the next year, everything between us felt effortless. We moved in together 6 months later, and by the time I proposed on a windy cliff in Cornwall, it honestly felt like my whole life had been leading to her. I wasn't rich, but I worked hard. We planned our wedding together, every detail, every guest, every small thing she cared about. I made sure to make it happen. She wanted a ceremony in the countryside, small but beautiful, and she said she wanted it to feel like a dream you don't want to wake up from. I didn't know then that dreams and nightmares can look the same until you open your eyes. The months before the wedding were stressful, sure, but nothing out of the ordinary. Or at least, that's what I told myself. She was more distant, busier with work, and constantly messaging people I didn't know. I noticed, of course, but I brushed it off. I thought, maybe she's nervous. Maybe she's overwhelmed. Everyone said wedding stress changes people a bit, and I was too in love to think any darker thoughts. The day before the wedding, we stayed in different places, as tradition goes. She stayed at the cottage near the venue with her maid of honor, and I stayed with my best friend, Bram. He joked that I was the calmest groom he'd ever seen. But inside, I was nervous. Not because I doubted her, but because I wanted everything to be perfect for her. The next morning, the world felt right. I woke up early, got dressed, looked in the mirror, and saw a man who'd made it. The guests arrived. The sun was shining through the stained glass windows of that little countryside chapel, and when the doors opened and I saw Ilara walking down the aisle in that pale gold dress, it felt like the air left the room. She looked unreal, calm, radiant, almost too composed. She smiled, but there was something about that smile, a flicker that I couldn't quite name. But I pushed it away. I told myself not to overthink. When she reached me, her hands were cold, but I thought it was nerves. The ceremony went beautifully. Vows, laughter, applause. Everything you'd expect from a fairy tale ending. Only mine was just beginning to fall apart. After the ceremony, we took photos near the field. She looked happy. At least, she looked like she was pretending well enough for the photos. During the reception, I started noticing little things. She disappeared for longer than usual between speeches. Her phone kept lighting up, and when I finally asked if everything was okay, she smiled that practiced smile again and said, "Just my cousin checking on the cake delivery." I believed her, because when you love someone enough, you'll believe anything that sounds close enough to the truth. The first real crack came later that night. After the party, when everyone had gone to their rooms and we were finally alone, she was distant. Not nervous distant, but emotionally gone. Like someone else had stepped into her body and left her eyes behind. I asked if she was all right, and she said, "Of course, why wouldn't I be?" before turning her back and pretending to fix her hair in the mirror. I remember standing there in that little honeymoon suite, confused, trying to make sense of it, telling myself, she's just tired. We'd barely been married for a few hours, and already something inside me knew, this isn't right. But how do you tell yourself the woman you just vowed to spend your life with might already be lying to you? The next morning, she was up early. She said she had to meet with the venue manager to settle the last bill before we left for the airport. I told her I'd come along, but she said no, that I should rest. She kissed me on the forehead like I was a child and left. 2 hours passed, then 3, then 5. I called her. No answer. I texted her. Nothing. I went downstairs, and the staff said she'd checked out. I laughed at first, thinking maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she'd gone to get coffee or surprise me with something romantic. I waited until the afternoon. Still nothing. That feeling, the one where your heart beats too loud and your stomach turns cold, never left me. I called Bram. He came over immediately, tried to calm me down, told me maybe she went to handle a family issue. But something in me knew she wasn't coming back. I called her parents. They didn't pick up either. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at her half of the room. Her wedding dress, the bouquet she'd left behind, and the ring that was supposed to mean forever sitting on the bedside table. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't even find the voice to. The next morning, I went to her parents' house, thinking maybe she was there. Her father opened the door. Looked like he'd seen a ghost. And in a way, he had, because I was the fool who didn't know his bride had never planned to stay. He invited me in, awkwardly. Her mother couldn't even meet my eyes. Then her father sat me down and said, "Callum, there's something you should know." My heart was hammering. He said Alara had debts, massive debts. She'd been in trouble before we even met, and apparently, she told them that marrying me was the only way to clear it. I didn't understand at first. Then he showed me something, documents, contracts, whatever you'd call them, where my name had been used to secure a joint account, loans I'd never agreed to. My stomach dropped. She'd used me. Every smile, every promise, every dream about our future. It was all part of a plan. I left their house numb. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just felt hollow. Like someone had scooped out everything good inside me and left an echo. That evening, I went to the police to report what happened. They told me they couldn't file it as a crime yet because technically, she was my wife and I consented to the accounts. The irony stung. The same system that was supposed to protect me was built to excuse people like her. Over the next few days, I tried to find her. I messaged every mutual contact. I went through her things. I found a second phone hidden in her luggage, the one she never used around me. That's where I saw it, messages between her and a man named Dre. The kind of messages that make your blood boil. He called her my love. She told him it's almost done. There were even photos, ones I'll never be able to erase from my mind. It hit me then. She hadn't just used me financially. She'd been planning this with him all along. They played me like a mark. I felt stupid, humiliated, small. I didn't leave my flat for 2 days. Bram came over, tried to convince me to eat something, but food didn't make sense anymore. How do you eat when your whole reality just crumbled overnight? On the third day, I went through her messages again, and one detail caught my eye. A flight confirmation. Paris. Departure the same morning she left me at the venue. That's when I knew. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I wasn't looking for revenge. I just needed the truth. Something solid in a world that suddenly felt fake. I booked the next flight to Paris the moment I saw that ticket in her messages. My hands were shaking so badly I mistyped my own surname twice before the payment went through. I didn't even tell anyone where I was going. What would I have said? Hey, I'm off to chase the woman who conned me out of love and money. It sounded pathetic, even in my own head. But I had to see her. I had to know if the person I loved ever really existed or if she'd been a performance all along. When I landed, Paris looked cruelly beautiful. The city of love mocking me with every street corner cafe and every couple holding hands like their world was safe. I followed the address I'd seen in one of her texts. A hotel in Montmartre. Nothing fancy, but not cheap either. My heart felt like a hammer against my ribs as I stood at the reception desk asking, as calmly as I could, if Mrs. Shaw was checked in. The clerk glanced at the screen, nodded politely, and said she'd checked out the previous afternoon. I almost laughed right there in the lobby. Of course she had. She was always one step ahead, always disappearing just as I arrived. I went outside, sat on a bench, and tried to breathe. I didn't even know why I was chasing her anymore. Some part of me wanted her arrested. Another part of me, the pathetic, still in love part, wanted her to look at me and say, "I'm sorry." I didn't care how broken it sounded. I just needed closure. Then, just as I was about to give up and head back to the airport, I saw her. She was walking down the street with a suitcase and a coffee, sunglasses on, her hair tied back the same way it was on our wedding day. My body froze. She hadn't changed a thing. Still that same calm, collected stride. And beside her was a man. Tall, sharp suit, carrying her second bag. I didn't even need to ask who he was. Dre. I stayed seated, head low, watching them from across the road. They were laughing, talking like two people without a care in the world. She leaned into him, the same way she used to lean into me. For a second, it felt like the whole world went quiet. Then something inside me just switched off. I didn't run up to them. I didn't shout. I didn't even want a scene. Instead, I followed. They walked into a cafe, sat near the window. She took off her glasses, and for the first time, I saw her properly since the wedding. She looked peaceful, like someone who'd gotten away with it. That was the moment I realized the truth. There was never going to be an apology. There was never going to be a reason good enough to make any of this make sense. So I did the only thing left that made sense to me. I took out my phone and started recording. Not just her face, but the man she was with, the hotel receipt in her hand, everything. Proof. Because if she was going to build her life on lies, then I was going to burn them with truth. I stayed just long enough to get what I needed. Then I left. I didn't follow them any further. I didn't even turn back. At the airport, I sat alone, scrolling through the photos and videos, feeling nothing but cold clarity. When I got back to Brighton, I went straight to the police with everything. Her hidden phone, the forged documents, the flight confirmation, and now the photos of her and Dre. This time, they couldn't brush it off as a domestic misunderstanding. A detective named Sergeant Lowe took my statement. He said, "You've done half our job for us, Mr. Wren." And for the first time in weeks, I almost smiled. The investigation took a few months. They traced her accounts, found connections to several other victims. She'd been running the same scam for years, different names, same trick. Romance, trust, marriage, debt, disappearance. I wasn't the first, and I wasn't even the worst hit. That hurt more than I expected. The idea that she'd done this before, that everything I thought was unique was just a routine, made me sick. When they finally caught her, it wasn't in Paris. It was in Madrid. She and Dre were trying to open new accounts under new names. I got the call from the detective one gray morning while I was making tea. He said, "We've got her." Just like that. No drama. No emotion. 3 words that should have felt like victory but instead just left me numb. They asked if I wanted to attend the hearing. I said yes. When the day came, I walked into that cold courtroom and saw her sitting there in a plain blouse, her hair tied back. She looked smaller than I remembered, less like a goddess and more like what she truly was, a con artist who'd played too many hearts. When she finally looked at me, her expression didn't flicker. No guilt, no shame, just calculation. The same look she probably gave every man before me. I wanted to hate her, but all I felt was exhaustion. When the judge asked if I had anything to say, I simply said, I trusted her, and I hope she never has the chance to do this to anyone again. She didn't react. Not once. They sentenced her to 7 years for fraud, forgery, and identity theft. Dre got 9. Apparently, he'd been the mastermind behind the financial side. I walked out of that courtroom lighter, but not happier. Freedom doesn't feel like joy when you've already lost the thing that gave your life meaning. It just feels quiet. The months after that were hard. People told me to move on, to start dating again, to see it as a lesson. But how do you move on from something that rewires the way you see trust? Every smile, every promise, every I love you suddenly feels like a possible lie. I spent a lot of time alone. Started walking every morning along the pier, just to remind myself that the world still existed beyond what she did to me. Slowly, life began to make sense again. Not in the big, cinematic way it used to, but in small, ordinary moments. A good cup of tea. A call from Bram. The sound of seagulls. I even went back to work after 6 months. My colleagues treated me gently, as if I'd been through a war. And in a way, I had. But the thing about surviving betrayal is that it changes your definition of peace. You stop waiting for big, happy endings. You start appreciating the absence of chaos. One evening, nearly a year later, I got a letter. It was from her. I don't even know how she managed to send it from prison, but she did. My hands trembled as I opened it. The handwriting was unmistakable. She started with, "Callum, I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know the truth." I almost stopped reading there, but I couldn't help myself. The letter said she hadn't planned to fall in love with me, that it started as a job, a setup, but somewhere along the line, it became real. She said she panicked, that Dre had control over her life, that she was scared. She said leaving me that morning was the hardest thing she'd ever done because she knew if she stayed, he would have destroyed me too. I didn't know what to believe in him all. Maybe some of it was true. Maybe it was just another manipulation. But I folded the letter carefully and put it away in a drawer. Not because I forgave her, but because it reminded me of something important. That people like her survive by rewriting their own stories, and I refused to be another chapter in her fiction. Instead, I started writing mine. Literally. I began journaling again. At first, it was just therapy, but soon it became habit. I wrote about what happened, how it felt, what it taught me. Eventually, I shared parts of it online. To my surprise, people related. Turns out, betrayal is a language too many of us speak fluently. It didn't make the pain vanish, but it turned it into something useful. That's what healing looks like sometimes, not forgetting, but reproposing. 2 years later, I met someone new. Her name's Nora. She's nothing like Alara, calm, grounded, honest in the way you can feel, not just hey. I told her everything from day one. She listened without judgment, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a fool for loving again. I won't pretend I'm completely healed. There are still nights when I wake up thinking I hear the echo of that wedding march, the one that led me into disaster. But I remind myself that surviving something like that doesn't make you broken. It makes you aware. Aware of who deserves your trust, and who only ever saw it as an opportunity. Sometimes, when I walk past that same little chapel where it all started, I still stop for a moment. I don't go in. I just stand there and look at it from across the road, watching new couples take photos, laughing, dreaming, unaware of how fragile those dreams really are. And instead of bitterness, I feel something close to gratitude. Because if I hadn't gone through that hell, I'd still be the man who thought love was blind. Now I know better. Love isn't blind. It just sees what it wants to until it learns how to look properly. My dream wedding turned into a nightmare, yes, but that nightmare also woke me up. And sometimes, that's what it takes to finally open your eyes.